Welcome back to another episode of Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. I'm your host, Doug Konopelko, Education Strategist at CDWG. Collaboration is one of those skills that everyone agrees is important to teach in our schools. Sometimes the lens we use when we talk about collaboration can end up in a conversation in cheating or collaboration. Today, I talk with the team from Lemonade Learning, Bree and Lainie, about what this conversation looks like in our schools and how we can drive forward this culture of collaboration.
My name is Lainie Rowell, and I'm super excited to be here. Thanks for having us. I am an educator, an author, a podcaster, former classroom teacher, and district leader, and now I am a full-time consultant, and my biggest client is Orange County Department of Ed, but I get to travel all over, usually. So that's kind of my education journey. It's been really fun, and I get to collaborate with amazing people like Bree.
Yay! Well, I'll just take that baton. We just did like a nice little handoff. So I'm Brianna Hodges, and I am also an educator, podcaster, not an official author, but author of lots of things, just not a for real like book. I don't have an ISBN number yet, but
We're working on it.
I am a lifelong learner, lover of story and experience and all kinds of things. Former classroom teacher, former district administrator, full-time consultant, which I think, I kind of go from in the classroom, I taught writing. And so we would try to condense our thoughts, right? So you would go from like the big, the half sheet of paper down to the index card, then down to the Post-it note. And so I kind of want to invert that of like, I went from the classroom to then the district. And now I'm like on the half sheet of paper where I get to look at that from a national lens and see what learning is like, from a little bit of a bigger perspective, if you will. But the beautiful thing about that is it still comes down to a personal exchange between learner and teacher, and whether that doesn't. I always say that doesn't matter. Whatever age and stage you're at, right? Like a teacher and a learner are whatever age and stage. So I am thrilled to get to be here, especially with my Lainie love. And so let's just dive in and see what else we could do. Oh, I will say I'm also remiss if I don't mention that I'm also super fortunate to get to be future ready faculty and work with that incredible team and school districts across. So thanks for having us.
Absolutely. And for folks who don't know, like I think of the Captain Planet thing, right? Our powers combined. So your powers combined make Lemonade Learning, right? Which is how we originally got in touch. So that's your show, and people should definitely check it out if they're not already familiar. But both of you have had a lot of different experiences in education. And what we find is a lot of times when we shift a perspective, to your point, when your lens changes, you shift a perspective, like the same activity can be seen very differently, right? And the way that we were talking about it before was this idea of collaboration, right? So if I am a teacher and I am helping a teacher down the hall on something that we're doing for the school, that's collaboration. If I'm a student who is helping another student on an assignment, and that assignment wasn't specifically given to the two of us, then that's cheating, right? So I think that there's that idea of the lens shifting making a big difference. So talk to me a little bit about some of your background and your work that you've seen over the years and how that reflects that sort of duality of the collaboration versus cheating.
I'll jump in on this one and say that so I run into this conversation a lot, and it's really, really interesting because from a teacher lens, from that educator lens, we kind of put cheating up there as like one of the 7 deadly sins. Like it is certainly not something that we condone and that we allow to happen. Plagiarism, cheating, bad mojo, things will happen, right? And so we're very fearful of that, mainly because we want to be able to assess the individual student's learning process as authentically as we can. And so how can we assess them? How can we help them if we don't know what they know at that point? And so, we've put in all of these different ways to prevent cheating, right? Like, so I think back in the day, I'm going to age myself, back in the day of like sitting in elementary school, and we made like the barricades, right? Like you would take your folder, your trapper keeper, and you would like set it up all around you so that no one could see like what your work was, right? And you wouldn't let anybody, see your paper, any of that kind of stuff. And that was encouraged by our teachers, right? Like they were like, yes, block off your work, let no one see you. That we move forward into, secondary schools, middle school, high school, where, everybody is like trying to balance all of these different pieces with your extracurricular activities. And what if you didn't get this finished or whatever? And then you like grab your friend's spiral or your friend's, worksheet, and then you're like madly filling it in. And so, what does that look like, and how do we kind of move forward? Because at the same time, whenever we get into secondary school, we start talking about study groups and study hall, and how can we, peer group and peer collaborate and peer tutor and all these different pieces. And so I think that one of the pieces that I always use with educators is I ask them, like, show me what cheating looks like. And it really confuses people at first. And so I'm like, all right, I'll show you what I believe cheating looks like, which is me sitting in my desk and going, Lainie, number three. And then Lainie, like, gives me the hand signal for whatever it is, or that kind of thing. Because, and I'm like, what's the goal? What's the motivation? The motivation is, I just need the answer. Like, don't give me any explanation. We don't have time for that. All I care about is giving me the exact answer that I need. There is no exchange of information. If I ask, what does collaboration look like? Collaboration is an exchange of information, right? It's like, this is what I think this is. What do you think? And then you offer your ideas, or I'm not understanding this part. Can you help me figure it out? And so it's truly learning in action, right? Like, it doesn't matter how old that person is that's giving that information. Like, if it's a peer situation, which is often where we get the most quality learning, right? Because they're the closest from proximity to knowledge. So they're able to explain it in ways that somebody who's known it for a lot longer can't quite. And so, you're getting that true collaborative experience, and that's what we're after, right? Like we've said over and over again, and research project after research project has shown that collaboration is one of the most highly sought after soft skills that we have, that we're looking for in the world globally, in our workforce. How do we help prepare our kids for what collaboration is, to be successful as global adults, right? Like, we want them to collaborate, but how do we get them there if they're setting their trapper keepers up all the time, right? Like, I can't imagine that at Google, right? Like, can you see like all the little, things lined up? And so I think that's something to grapple with a lot, of like, how do we break that down? So Lainie, what do you think?
As you're talking, I'm thinking about the theoretical framework that I often design through is that community of inquiry, and how can we have that teacher presence, that social presence, and that cognitive presence. And so, the trapper keeper for the high stakes testing, that's a tough one, and that's a reality. And that's our current reality, is we still have those high stakes testing. But what to me is the most beneficial in a community of learners is the formative assessment and the benchmarks, right? And so really, for me, probably even more so the formative assessment. So in this community of inquiry where I'm trying to build this social and cognitive presence, I'm the teacher, I'm designing, I'm facilitating, but I also want to really make sure there's this social presence where we're having these interpersonal relationships where that collaboration is really good and really strong, and not just in the group of 4, 2 people are working really hard and 2 people are kind of kicking back. Like, that's part of my teacher presence, is to make sure that social presence is happening, that those interpersonal relationships are working really well. And then the third one, that cognitive presence, where we're co-constructing meaning. And like you mentioned earlier, Bree, we know that this, learning is a social thing. And so the peer instruction that you mentioned, so valuable when we can co-construct that meaning. That is when it's really going to stick. And so that's going to show up on the high stakes testing. But that's something that we have to do. That's my focus is on the formative, and how am I preparing them for the benchmarks and the high stakes? But my focus is on how are we going to co-construct. So community of inquiry is what I was thinking as you were talking about that, because that's all about collaboration.
Yeah, and it took me also to the idea of process versus product, right?
Yes.
So a lot of times when we're talking about learning, people are caught in this idea of sort of learning as a product, as a final end goal, right? But really what we know from being in the classroom and having those conversations and driving that work is that what we're really concerned with is the process, right? And understanding what I can do as a learner and what I can do, with the skills that I have, rather than with this one sort of direct piece of knowledge. Right. So when in your example, Bree, the idea of, cheating being somebody whispering to someone next to them just to try to get an answer, right? Whereas collaboration is we have this project and we're working together hand in hand the whole way. Right. So the product follows, right, that process, but the process is really where the learning happens, not in showing that last product off.
So the English nerd in me is going to say that the difference is a product is a noun, right? So knowledge is a noun, it is something that has been acquired. The process is learning, and our whole goal of education is learning. It's not to, the goal of education is not proving what you already knew. It is growing through the process. It is learning. It's the verb. It's the state of constantly taking all of this information, processing it, synthesizing it, cognitively breaking it down and creating new meaning or metacognition or all these different elements. And that only exists when you have that co-construction, when you have those perspectives, when you have, all of these different elements that come into it, because otherwise we just have massive groupthink, right? Where it's just every single person, or not groupthink, I'm sorry, but massive echo chamber, right? Where it's just everyone is saying the exact same thing. There is no room for diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of culture. There's no room for that, which is completely opposite of the goal of learning. And so I think, we have to be able to introduce those elements so that we can better understand and synthesize and really relate to what we're learning, right? Because I think that's a part of it. Otherwise, you've just memorized and been told what to think. If you really want to learn something, you have to be able to make it your own, to personalize it, and to bring that in. And that only happens when you're defending it with your friends, right? You're batting it back and forth and being well, this is what I think. Oh, okay. Well, this is what I think. Oh, well, you know what? That sort of makes sense. I think that too. And, being able to kind of have some of those good, continual conversations that aren't just lather, rinse, repeat. This is always the perfect situation where this will happen. And when you try it every single time, you will always come out with this one answer, because I've yet to see that actually happen in real life. But that's what we treat them as.
Well, yeah. I just love what she's saying, because I'm actually, can I quote Bree back to Bree? Because she'll often say we need to teach kids how to think, not what to think. And I think that as we're really getting kids to truly collaborate, we've got to clearly define those expectations. And I mean co-create. I mean an ongoing conversation about what this looks like. Because I do think some kids and adults have trouble with what you're talking about, Bree, this discourse. And we want to have that. We want people to be able to have these conversations, but we have to really set the stage for that. So I think I love what you're saying. I'm quoting you back to you.
Very meta. Thank you, Lainie. That was a Matrix experience for me all of a sudden.
Yeah, the metacognition. This is a meta Bree on this one. So the other thing that you made me think of there was It was something that I think it was Chris Lehman who runs the Science Leadership Academy I want to say it's Philadelphia, had once either presented or said, and it was something along the lines of like, if I give out, instructions and get 35 back of the same thing, right? That's a recipe, right?
Right.
There's like, I shouldn't be wanting to get back the exact same thing when I'm working in learning with students in the classroom, right? How things get expressed, how things end up, right? If I assign something, I should want to get back 35 different things, right? Because that shows, to your point, that there's diversity of voice, diversity of experiences, diversity of cultures that all weigh into the work that we end up showing.
I love
So,
it. Absolutely.
believe it or not, we are already at time. So I want to thank both of you so much for being here. The Lemonade Learning crew on Focus on K-12. So thank you so much for being here and spending some time with us.
Thank you, Doug. It's been so fun.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today on Focus on K-12 EdTech and the Education Experience. If you enjoyed today's show, please feel free to like, subscribe, and click the little bell so that you get notified whenever we post a new episode. Or reach out to me on Twitter @dconopelco. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time as we focus on K-12.